Hey friends, it's me, your girl, Kristen Denise, also known as KD, here with day 23 of Black History Month. Thank you to everyone who has participated in any way, like, commented, shared on any of the information I've shared during Black History Month. I just want to give you a heads up. I'm going to keep the party going post Black History Month. It will not be with the same frequency because I have some other projects and things I'll be working on, one of which being finish my PhD. But I'm going to keep talking about Black history. I'm going to keep talking about the contributions of Black people, in particular Black Americans. I'm going to expand some, though, and talk about the diaspora a little bit more as well, because Black people have been doing the dang thing the whole world over for generations. And so we should highlight all of that, I believe. And I'm going to work on highlighting all of that because I believe in truth, and I believe in people having access to accurate history and education. And so I'm committed to being a public educator in this way and sharing more about the contributions of Black Americans, in particular Black people as a whole. And if you want to just stay up to date on that, make sure you like, comment, follow, share so that you can stay up to date on the things I'll be sharing about. I'm really excited for all the things I'll plan to share about as we move forward. But let's jump into today. Let's dive into today. So I'm going to talk about somebody who is actually probably a little bit more well-known than some of the other people I've spoken about. It's another dynamic Black woman, because you know how I feel about me some Black women. Okay. I love me some Black women. But I just don't think we know enough about her. And there were even some things I learned about her. So I'm talking about Sojourner Truth today. She was an abolitionist, a women's rights activist, and a traveling evangelist, which I did not know that she was a traveling evangelist. She was born into slavery in 1797 in New York, and she transitioned in 1883. She self-emancipated, i.e. escaped from enslavement. And so we're going to just learn a little bit more about her today and the role her faith played in who she became and the stature she held within the community as a Black woman. So again, she was born into enslavement in New York, but she became one of the most powerful voices for abolition, women's rights, and for faith-based activism in American history. She was absolutely an evangelist, a preacher, a public speaker, and a fierce advocate for justice. She talked about using her faith and her own personal story and her compelling oratory skills to challenge racism, sexism, and enslavement. Though she was illiterate, she never learned to read and write. Her words and ideas were so powerful that she helped to change the course of history. And she's attributed with delivering one of the most famous speeches. We're going to get into that in U.S. history, Ain't I a Woman, in 1851. Her life teaches us about faith, resilience, courage, and the power of speaking truth to power, which she absolutely did. So she was born Isabella Bonfrey in Ulster County, New York, in a Dutch-speaking area. She was bought and sold multiple times, and she endured harsh physical labor and separation from her family. As a child, she was forced to learn English, but she never ever learned to read or write, like I already stated. And in 1826, she escaped enslavement with her infant daughter, but her other children remained enslaved. Her early life of hardship really helped to shape who she became and her fight for freedom and justice throughout the rest of her life. So some of her key contributions include that she said her faith helped to lead her to freedom. Her Christian faith was super central to her life and to her activism. She had a spiritual awakening after escaping enslavement, and she believed that God had called her to preach and fight for justice. So in 1843, she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, saying that the Spirit calls me and I must go. Whew. And she became a traveling preacher, spreading the message of abolition, women's rights, and salvation. She proved that faith and activism are absolutely inseparable, and her belief in God is what fueled her fight for justice. She was also a legal pioneer. Now, I did learn this about her maybe 2 years or so ago, and I thought this was super dope. She was one of the first Black women to win a court case in the United States, in particular, a court case against a white man. So as I previously stated, she self-emancipated in 1826, taking her youngest daughter. But after slavery was officially abolished in the state of New York, she went back and sued her former enslaver because he illegally sold her child into enslavement in the South. And she won that case. And they had to go and get her son back from the South where they sold him. So I thought that was dope because she did that in the 1820s. 1828 to be specific. She became one of the first Black women in U.S. history to successfully challenge a white man in court. And she showed that Black women could fight using the legal system, even in an era of extreme injustice. We're about the 1820s. So slavery is still legal at this point in general, even though it had been abolished at this point in New York. which I always thought that was just something really, really cool that she fought as a mother, as a woman, against her former enslaver, and she won. She became a leading abolitionist, working alongside figures like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. She traveled across the country, delivering very powerful speeches against enslavement. Unlike male abolitionists, she often used her personal testimony, because she was enslaved well into her adult life, to expose the horrors of slavery. She also helped to recruit Black soldiers for the Union Army during the Civil War, helping enslaved people to gain their freedom. She proved that the truth of one's lived experience was the most powerful argument against oppression. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting as of late. In 1851, she did deliver a speech at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. Now, it is known broadly that it was her "Ain't I a Woman" speech, but some modern research is showing she may have actually never used that phrase, and there was someone who was inspired by her original speech in 1851 and delivered a speech about 10 to 15 years later, taking portions of her original speech and then including the "Ain't I a Woman," but attributing it back to Sojourner Truth. So, if she didn't say it, she at least inspired it. That's what we're going to go with. But it is reported she actually never used that phrasing in the original speech, although the original speech she gave was very powerful. In the speech, she talked about basically how she did as much as a man. She could eat as much as a man. Like, she could do all of these things, and she had been used for her prowess and her ability to do all these things, but then she wasn't respected fully as the woman that she was, even though in every measure she could do the same things as a man could do. Her speech became a rallying cry for Black women's rights, proving that Black women's struggles were different from those of white women. And she challenged racism and sexism in her speech, showing that Black women were excluded from both abolitionist and feminist movements. She wasn't nothing to play with. She was one of the first Black women to publicly speak about intersectionality, even if she did not use that specific phrasing of "Ain't I a Woman," long before the term intersectionality existed. Unlike many early feminists, she fought for the rights of all women, including Black women. She did still work alongside Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but she definitely often challenged their racism. She fought for land rights for free Black women as well, believing that economic independence was essential for liberation. She showed that Black women's struggles were unique and deserved their own movement. She considered herself a faith healer and a community builder, which I love. She believed that she had healing powers and would often pray for God to heal the sick. And she worked to create communities of free Black people after the Civil War. And in Washington, D.C., she actually lobbied President Abraham Lincoln, encouraging him to support Black economic independence. And she modeled, how faith could be used to help build and restore communities. She faced many challenges throughout her life: illiteracy, sexism in the abolitionist movement, and racism within the women's rights movement. But it only encouraged her to speak louder. It helped her to fight harder. And she never let anybody else define her worth. And she never gave up the power of her own voice. She continued preaching and fighting for justice until her death in 1883. She was actually honored with a statue at the U.S. Capitol, making her one of the first Black women to be memorialized there. And her legacy lives on today in activists, preachers, and leaders who continue to fight for justice and equality. She paved the way for Black women preachers, public speakers, and civil rights activists, and we absolutely thank her for her service today. Some things that we can learn from her life and her struggle are: one, never be afraid to speak truth to power, even when it's unpopular. When is truth ever popular? When it comes against those who are in power. But Sojourner Truth called out injustice even when it made other people feel uncomfortable. She spoke boldly against racism, sexism, and oppression, and we need to continue to do the same things today. And we need to always use our platforms to demand change. We deserve change. We are entitled to change. Change is what is right, and that's what we are calling for. You do not have to have a formal education to be brilliant. This woman who never learned to read and write became one of the most prolific speakers and strongest abolitionists of her day, and a powerful preacher, and just an amazing advocate, even without formalized education and an inability to read and write. We don't have to let our lack of formal education or specific opportunities stop us from doing what we have been created and called to do. That just brings me joy in ways I can't even fully express. She may have lacked the credentials, but she did not lack the power. And the power is what mattered in the end. As always, the voices of Black women in these spaces matter. She proved that Black women deserve to be heard in both racial and gender justice movements. And we have to make sure we're supporting Black women leaders in politics, churches, and the movements that we see happening today. And we have to challenge movements that exclude the voices of Black women. Sojourner Truth was more than an abolitionist. She was absolutely a prophet, a preacher, and a warrior for justice. Her life teaches us that faith and activism are inseparable. Black women must be included in every justice movement. You do not need permission to lead, and truth-telling is a revolutionary act. And that is amazing. So, in all you're getting, get truth and understanding. And just make sure that you don't allow who you are not or what you don't have to stop you from doing what you absolutely are called to do and you can do. Just like Sojourner Truth. So that's all I have today. As always, remember, do what you need to do to be more than okay, because you deserve to be more than okay. And absolutely do what you need to do to live a life you love, because you deserve to live a life you love. I love you. Make it a good one. Mwah.